Let the Halloween season begin with my review of Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. After the success of Friday the 13th, Part 4, the final chapter, Paramount, despite calling Part 4 the final chapter, decided they wanted more money and decided to continue the franchise. This would be the first film in the franchise since the first one that didn't have Jason as the killer. Spoiler alert for this almost 40-year-old movie. This time it was directed by Danny Steinman, who previously had only done exploitation films and one adult film. This film was plenty sleazy and probably the most sex-heavy of the franchise up to that point, and it's honestly one of my favorite guilty pleasure slashers of all time. So without further ado, let's get into the story. Set several years after the events of the final chapter, we see Tommy Jarvis, now played by an older actor, although there is a brief scene of a young Tommy Jarvis, played once again by Corey Feldman, in a dream flashback. Now much older Tommy, who I believe is supposed to be a teenager, although he's played by a man in his 20s, is sent to this group home of sorts for kids who are troubled. While there, one of the kids, quote-unquote, played by a man who looks like he's 30, and murders one of the more special needs residents at the house for offering him a chocolate bar. This inadvertently sets off a series of killings. That's right, this entire movie is all over a chocolate bar. This film, as you can tell by the director's background, is plenty sleazy, and it really shows. But on to the positives of the movie. For one, I'd have to say the characters are actually pretty interesting and memorable. Characters like Demon and his brother, Reggie the Reckless, are really entertaining and provide a good laugh to the film. Characters like Ethel and Junior can be a bit much and are honestly really corny, but they also are very funny at times. Tommy's the most elusive and mysterious you've ever seen in the franchise, and is something of a red herring, so to speak, but he's actually interesting as well, and I really do like his performance. Also, the kills, which are a little bit neutered by the MPAA, are still pretty good this time around. And apart from a few cheaper looking effects, the gore is really on point. Another positive to this film is its sleazy nature. I really like the way in which the film is made. It's grimy, it's just a trashy kind of movie, but that actually adds to the enjoyment of the film and gives it a very unique feeling. The score, as always, is really good. They reused the original theme several times, and everything has like a moody and appropriate sound to it, and it really adds to the atmosphere of the film. And lastly, the direction and look of the movie is also very good. The Friday the 13th franchise has always been pretty atmospheric, and this film is no exception, and it really creates a very haunting mood that's perfect for the Halloween season. Now on to the more mixed aspects of the movie. The director, Danny Steinman, wanted more TNA in the film, and Paramount agreed, but at the behest of reduced violence. And this is the first one in the franchise that feels not nearly as violent or over the top as the first four. The MPAA was always strict on this series, more so than other horror franchises that are more violent, probably because of the mainstream popularity of the film. And it kind of shows here for the first time. This is the first Friday the 13th film that feels a little bit watered down in terms of violence. Like I said, it is made up for it for those who are into the TNA action, but I'd much rather see more gore as a part to more boobs. This isn't really a negative because the violence that is in the film is still pretty hard-hitting, but it could have been a little more intense like the first four of the franchise. Another somewhat mixed aspect would have to be the goofier tone. I do like the goofier tone, but the first four were very serious in comparison to this movie, and if you're not on board for a somewhat tongue-in-cheek Friday the 13th film, this might not be your favorite. As for the negatives, the only thing I would really say would have to be a negative is the film's ending. Not only do we find the reveal of Jason, spoiler alert, to be the father of the kid who was killed at the beginning of the film, it's just not really the best motivation to start killing random people and never even getting the revenge on the guy who actually murdered his son. And on top of that, there's also this really dumb red herring where they imply that Tommy's going to be the new Jason at the end of the movie, and that storyline literally goes nowhere and is completely abandoned in Part 6. There's also a few continuity errors with the rest of the franchise. Like in this movie, they mentioned that Jason was cremated and he's nothing but ash, but when Part 6 begins, we see that he actually has a grave. This actually was explained in a deleted scene where Jason's father was actually secretly having him buried and was paying off the gravedigger at the place to keep it a secret, but this was never filmed, and I believe it was going to be in part 6. But apart from a few continuity errors, and of course a really ridiculous motive and somewhat lackluster ending, I really do enjoy this film. It's definitely over the top. There's no actual Jason this time around, and it's plenty sleazy, but it's a fun, trashy, good time, and one that I really enjoy. This one I feel gets a lot of hate, but people are looking at it, I think, in the wrong lens, just wanting more Jason. But if you look at it as a fun entry into the franchise that takes place in the same universe without Jason Voorhees, I think you're going to have yourself a good time. What I love about this film is that it's also a slight homage to the original. It's about a person who has a special needs kid who is murdered due to, you could argue, neglect from people who are supposed to be watching him, and this leads to a rampage. It's kind of like the original film, only a lot more goofier. As for my final score, I'm going to have to give Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning, a 7 out of 10. If we're talking pure entertainment, it's probably like an 8, but I do have to acknowledge some of the film's flaws and goofier aspects, as well as continuity and discrepancies with the ending. But those are not the biggest problems, and I actually do find this to be one of the more entertaining entries into the franchise, despite its flaws. If you haven't seen Part 5, due to its bad reputation, give it a chance. It's goofy fun and an entertaining film through and through, and one that I think you will enjoy, as long as you don't mind not having Jason this time around. I thank you all for watching. We have more horror movies to talk about this spooky season. Those videos will be released with probably a few days after this one. And I hope you all have a great Halloween, and peace out.